There's a strange kind of silence that follows a life full of noise. It's not the kind you find in an empty room or during the pause between two conversations. It's deeper, the kind that settles in your bones after years of pushing through things you never gave yourself time to feel. And when that silence comes, it doesn't ask permission. It doesn't arrive with a gentle knock. It floods you. It strips everything away. And suddenly you're sitting face to face with yourself, realizing how long it's been since you've really looked. At first, that silence feels unbearable, like it might drown you, like it's pressing against every wall you've built. Because without the noise, without the distractions, all that remains is you, just you. And that can be terrifying when you've spent years running from your own presence. You begin to realize that most of your life was filled with movement, not progress, with doing, not being, with achieving, not arriving. But now the stillness is here, and for the first time, there's nowhere to go but inward. You start to notice things you used to ignore. The tightness in your chest when certain thoughts come. The way your shoulders tense when you speak certain truths. The subtle ache behind your smile. These small signals were always there. You just never paused long enough to listen. Now you're listening. And with that listening comes the beginning of something sacred. Not the kind of healing that happens in the light, but the kind that happens underground, in the dark, where roots grow. You realize that a lot of your pain wasn't caused by others, but by the way you silence yourself, by the way you minimize your needs, by the way you tolerated what hurt because you were afraid of being alone. You see clearly now how many times you said yes when your whole body was begging you to say no. How many times you laughed to keep the peace. How many times you swallowed the truth because it didn't fit the version of you others wanted to see. And with that realization comes grief. Not for what was done to you, but for what you did to survive. That grief is heavy. It doesn't move quickly. It sits with you. But instead of pushing it away, you start to let it teach you. It teaches you where your boundaries were too thin, where your self-worth was too fragile, where your identity was too attached to being needed, being liked, being useful. And as painful as those lessons are, you know you need them, because they are the foundation upon which something new can grow. You begin to dismantle the life you built on fear, not all at once, brick by brick, belief by belief. You question the stories you've been told, that love must hurt, that rest must be earned, that you must prove your value every day. You challenge the idea that healing means fixing. Maybe it means remembering. Maybe it means returning to the parts of you that were always whole, the parts you buried beneath achievement, perfectionism, and the need to be seen. You start speaking differently, not louder but clearer. You no longer speak to be heard. You speak to be honest. You no longer edit your emotions to be digestible. You let them be what they are: messy, beautiful, real. You stop apologizing for crying. You stop pretending to be okay when you're not. You stop asking for permission to feel. The people around you notice. Some embrace the change. Others resist it. Some leave. Some stay. And you learn to let them. You understand that growth will always disrupt relationships built on your silence. And that's okay. You're no longer afraid of being too much or not enough. You're simply committed to being true. You've realized that peace isn't about making everyone happy. It's about making yourself whole. You start building a new relationship with solitude. Not loneliness, but solitude. The sacred space where your soul can breathe, where you can ask questions without needing immediate answers, where you can feel without needing to fix. You light candles not because it's trendy, but because it reminds you of warmth. You journal not to perform, but to reflect. You take walks not to get somewhere, but to come home to yourself. Slowly, the silence becomes less terrifying. It becomes a friend, a guide. You look forward to the mornings when everything is still, when you can hear the birds outside your window and feel the sunlight on your skin. You begin to understand that healing isn't about doing more. You treat it as a companion, as a sacred home. You stop comparing your timeline to others. You stop rushing your healing to keep up with someone else's highlight reel. You realize that growth doesn't always look like progress. Sometimes it looks like sitting still. Sometimes it looks like crying in the shower. Sometimes it looks like saying, I don't know who I am anymore, and letting that be the beginning of something beautiful. You begin to reclaim your softness. In a world that glorifies hardness, this is a radical act. You allow your heart to break open. You cry in public. You say, I love you first. You hug longer. You laugh louder. You let joy in, not because life is perfect, but because you know how fleeting it is. You no longer wait for permission to feel. You no longer see vulnerability as weakness. You see it as strength, as truth, as the doorway to connection. You also stop expecting healing to be linear. You accept that some days you'll feel like you've arrived, only to wake up the next day and feel lost again. You no longer take that as failure. You take it as life, as the ebb and flow, as the spiral that brings you back to the same lessons, deeper each time. And with each return, you bring more compassion, more patience, more grace. You create rituals, not routines, but rituals, intentional acts that nourish your spirit, lighting a candle before meditation, whispering a prayer before sleep, touching your heart when you feel overwhelmed, smiling at your reflection, even when you don't believe the smile yet. These rituals become anchors. They remind you that you're not lost, that you're returning, always returning. You begin to forgive, not just others, but yourself, for the times you didn't know better, for the ways you abandoned yourself, for staying too long, for leaving too soon. You stop holding yourself hostage to your past. You release the shame. You replace judgment with understanding. You start treating yourself like someone you love. And as you do, something inside you shifts. You begin to see beauty where you used to see brokenness. You see the scars, not as flaws, but as stories, as reminders of what you've survived. You no longer wish away your past. You hold it. You bless it. You allow it to exist without dominating your future. You are no longer trying to escape your life. You are living it, not perfectly, not without pain, but fully, presently, honestly. You have found something more precious than happiness. You have found peace. Healing begins in places we often overlook, not always in the grand decisions or loud declarations, but in the quiet spaces, the breath you take after a difficult truth, the moment you choose to pause instead of react, the soft no that takes everything in you to say. These moments, so small they could go unnoticed, are where transformation takes root. You may not see them at first, you may not even feel different, but your soul knows, your nervous system knows. These are the moments when you stop running, when you start listening, when you begin truly to live in your own skin. There's an unexpected grief that comes when you begin to heal. You look back at your life, the decisions you made while trying to feel loved, the ways you shaped yourself to survive, and it breaks your heart a little. Not because you were weak, but because you realize how long you lived believing you weren't enough. And as you grieve, you also begin to forgive. You forgive yourself for the things you didn't know, the things you tolerated, the love you gave without boundaries. And in that forgiveness, something softens, something deepens. You stop fighting yourself. You learn to sit with discomfort, not as an enemy, but as a guide. You realize discomfort isn't something to fix. It's something to feel, something that points you to the parts of yourself still asking to be seen. You sit in the ache, the fear, the longing. You stop numbing. You stop running. You allow the storm to move through you, and in doing so, you learn something essential. The storm is not the enemy. The storm is the space where something new can grow. And as that growth unfolds, you begin to make choices that reflect who you're becoming. Now, you notice the relationships in your life with new eyes. You see which ones feel like home and which ones feel like performances. You let go of the connections that require you to abandon yourself. You stop trying to convince people to stay. You let them go, not with bitterness, but with love. Because you know now that your peace is too precious to sacrifice. That being alone is better than being misunderstood. That wholeness is found not in how many people stand beside you, but in how fully you stand with yourself. You also start showing up differently for others, not to fix them, but to witness them. You stop offering advice when all someone needs is your presence. You listen without planning your reply. You hold space without needing to be the hero. You understand now that healing isn't about being above pain. It's about becoming a safe place for it. And in becoming that space, you also allow others to feel safe being human around you. You see, the more you accept your own humanity, the more you accept it in others. The more you forgive yourself, the more you understand the forgiveness others need. The more you release the need to control your emotions, the more you allow others the freedom to feel theirs. This is compassion. Not the surface kind, but the kind that rises from deep knowing. The kind that understands pain without needing the full story. The kind that doesn't turn away from sorrow, but moves closer to it, gently. Your relationship with time begins to change. You stop measuring your life in deadlines and accomplishments. You begin to measure it in presence, in how often you laugh, in how deeply you feel, in how gently you speak to yourself on the hard days. You learn that success isn't just reaching goals, it's learning to stay with the discomfort, to stay with the joy, to stay with yourself when everything in you wants to run. You also stop apologizing for your pace. You stop rushing to catch up to a life you never wanted in the first place. You walk slower. You breathe deeper. You savor moments instead of counting them. You understand now that life is not a race. It's a journey of becoming. And becoming cannot be rushed. It happens in layers, in seasons, in spirals. You begin to embrace your softness, not as something to be hardened, but as something to be protected. You stop viewing sensitivity as a flaw. You start seeing it as your superpower. The way you feel deeply, the way you notice what others miss, the way you hold the weight of the world in your chest. These are not weaknesses. They are the marks of someone who is alive, awake, aware, and maybe for the first time, you begin to enjoy your own company. You no longer fear silence. You sit with it. You dance with it. You let it teach you. You journal not to perform, but to explore. You walk alone not to escape, but to return. You no longer look outside yourself for fulfillment. You begin to understand that everything you were seeking was inside you all along. Even joy begins to feel different. It's not always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, subtle. The joy of clean sheets, of sun on your skin, of an exhale after a long day, of a song that reminds you of someone you once were. These joys aren't big, but they're real, and they're enough. You don't need grand experiences to feel alive. You need presence, and you're learning how to be present, one breath at a time. You're not afraid to cry anymore. You cry without apology, without hiding, without shame, because you understand now that tears are not weakness. They are cleansing, they are truth, they are the language of a soul that's finally being heard. And you are listening now. Really listening, not to respond, not to fix, but to understand. And through it all, you begin to trust yourself. Not in the way others have taught you, through accomplishments, through approval, through achievement, but in the way only experience can teach, through feeling, through falling and getting back up, through choosing yourself again and again. You begin to believe that no matter what happens, you will be okay, because you have yourself, and that is everything. You look back sometimes, not with regret, but with reverence. You see how far you've come, how much you've shed, how deeply you've returned. You honor the person you were. You thank when your reflection shows parts of you you're still learning to love. It takes courage to meet yourself there, to resist the urge to distract, to escape, to numb, to stay, to breathe, to say, even here, I will not abandon you. That kind of presence changes everything, not just how you heal, but how you live. Because once you learn to hold yourself in the darkness, the light becomes a home, not a reward. You begin to understand that peace isn't the absence of pain. It's the ability to stay soft in its presence. You no longer strive to be untouched by life. You aim to be touched by it fully and still remain grounded. You let the waves come, but you're not swept away. You let the winds blow, but your roots deepen. You let yourself feel without losing yourself to the feeling. That balance doesn't arrive overnight. It's practiced, chosen, cultivated, but it comes. And when it does, you find yourself breathing differently, not just with your lungs, but with your whole being. You notice how your breath has become your anchor, how it pulls you back when your mind runs ahead, how it steadies you when your heart stirs, how something so simple, so often taken for granted, can be the most faithful companion. Inhale, you remind yourself. Exhale, you release. And in that rhythm, life begins to move through you instead of against you. You don't have to fight for calm. You return to it again and again. And each time you do, it welcomes you without judgment. You start tending to your inner world the way you would a garden, with patience, with care. You don't rip the weeds out in frustration. You kneel beside them. You ask why they grew there in the first place. You see that everything inside you, the fear, the anger, the longing, is trying to tell you something. And you listen, not to control, but to understand, not to correct, but to connect. You stop seeing emotions as problems. You see them as parts of yourself still asking for love. Even the parts of you that once felt too painful to face start to soften. The inner critic, the wounded child, the self-saboteur. You stop trying to silence them. You sit with them. You say, I see you. I know you were trying to protect me. But we don't have to live that way anymore. And slowly, those parts stop yelling. They begin to trust you because you're not rejecting them. You're holding them with compassion. That's what healing is. Not becoming someone new, becoming someone safe for yourself. You start to approach life with less urgency. You don't rush to make decisions. You don't react out of panic. You pause, you reflect. You ask, does this align with who I'm becoming? And if it doesn't, you let it go. Not because you're better than it, but because it no longer fits. You understand now that not everything is meant to stay. Some things are chapters. Some people are lessons. Some dreams are stepping stones. Letting go isn't failure. It's clarity. You begin to release the version of you that needed to have it all figured out. You embrace uncertainty, not with fear, but with faith. You trust that life unfolds in ways the mind can't always predict. That some of the most beautiful moments happen not in the planning, but in the surrender. You stop micromanaging your path. You start walking it, step by step, breath by breath, letting the journey teach you what the destination never could. And in doing so, you begin to feel more connected, not just to yourself, but to everything, to the sky, to the trees, to the people you pass on the street, to the small sacred details you once rushed past, a bird landing near your window, the way your fingertips feel running over soft fabric, the sound of someone laughing nearby. These moments ground you. They remind you that life is not something to conquer. It's something to participate in, to be present for, to be changed by. You also begin to reclaim your intuition, that quiet inner knowing that was drowned out for so long by noise, by pressure, by expectations. You realize now that your body has always known, that your heart has always spoken, that your gut has always pointed the way. You were just taught not to listen. And when conflict arises, and it will, you no longer see it as something to win. You see it as a mirror. What is this showing me about my boundaries, about my wounds, about my needs? You don't attack. You don't collapse. You respond. You choose clarity over chaos, truth over triumph, connection over control. And even when the other person doesn't meet you there, you don't lose yourself, because now you know how to stay anchored. Your identity begins to shift, not as a mask you wear, but as an expression of your soul. You stop identifying with your job, your achievements, your roles. You begin to ask deeper questions. Who am I beneath the labels? What do I value when no one's watching? How do I want to feel in this life, not just what do I want to do? These questions become your compass. They guide your choices. They shape your days. You start creating from a different place, not from scarcity, but from overflow. Not to prove, but to express. Not to be seen, but to be true. Your art changes. Your words change. Your energy changes. You're no longer performing, you're revealing, and people feel it. They respond not to the image, but to the essence, because authenticity has a vibration that can't be faked. You also begin to play again, to laugh, to explore, to be curious without needing answers. You reconnect with the parts of you that existed before the world told you to grow up. You dance in your kitchen, you try new things, you say yes to adventures. You stop waiting for the perfect moment. You let life surprise you, because you've realized joy doesn't come from control. It comes from surrender. And through all of this, you begin to live in deeper gratitude, not forced, not performative, but embodied. You wake up and thank your breath. You see the beauty in a cloudy sky. You feel the miracle of your heart still beating, your body still moving, your soul still expanding. You thank your past, not because it was easy, but because it brought you here. You thank your pain, not because it was fair, but because it opened your heart. You thank yourself for staying, for trying, for healing. You are not who you were. You are not who you will be. You are the becoming, and that is enough. There's a rhythm you begin to feel when you finally step out of survival mode. It doesn't come all at once, but in waves. At first, it's a strange, unfamiliar quiet. Your body doesn't know how to rest without bracing for the next blow. Your nervous system, used to chaos, keeps waiting for the next disruption. Even joy feels suspicious at first. Peace makes you tense because you don't trust it to last. But the more you breathe, the more you return to the present, the more your heart starts to slow. The more you realize that safety isn't a place out there. It's something you build inside yourself. You remember the days when your mind was always racing, when every quiet moment was filled with panic, like silence itself was dangerous. But now you begin to reclaim silence. You sit with it. You explore it. You realize it's not the enemy. It's the space where truth begins to speak. And sometimes that truth is hard to hear. It might tell you you've outgrown something you thought you needed. It might ask you to leave a comfort zone that's become a cage. It might show you how small you've made yourself just to be accepted. And when it does, it doesn't yell. It whispers. And something in you knows, it's time. You begin to live with intention, not just in the big moments, but in the little ones. You notice how your shoulders rise when you're stressed, how your breathing shortens when you feel unseen, how your stomach tightens when you say yes but mean no. These signs become invitations, not problems. Invitations to slow down, to check in, to care. You stop waiting for a breakdown to start tending to yourself. You learn to respond to the whispers so you don't have to wait for the screams. You stop needing your life to look a certain way to feel proud of it. You stop measuring your worth in productivity. You stop seeing rest as a luxury. You rest because you're human, because your body deserves softness, because healing takes energy, because joy needs space. You make tea slowly. You listen to music. There's a quiet kind of power that comes from standing in your own truth. It doesn't demand attention. It doesn't dominate a room. It simply is. You stop trying to convince others of your value. You stop begging people to stay. You stop fearing rejection like it's a reflection of your worth. You learn that not everyone will see you, and that's okay. You're not for everyone, but you are for you. And the more you live in alignment with that, the more peace you find. And peace doesn't mean everything feels good. It means you no longer resist what is. You meet life with openness, with grace, with the understanding that joy and sorrow are not opposites, they're companions. You stop trying to avoid pain and instead ask what it's here to teach you. You hold joy with open hands, knowing it's meant to be felt, not possessed. You learn that life isn't about control, it's about participation. And you, for the first time in a long time, are fully here. There's a moment when you begin to see the beauty in your scars, not because they're pretty, but because they're honest. They tell the story of a life lived deeply, a life that didn't run from pain, a life that chose growth over numbness. You no longer hide your wounds. You hold them like badges of survival, of awakening, of resilience. You stop pretending you were never hurt. Instead, you say, I was, and I'm still here, and I'm healing. You start speaking more kindly to yourself. You catch the voice of your inner critic and respond not with more judgment, but with understanding. You ask where that voice came from, whose voice it really is, and you begin to replace it, not with fake affirmations, but with truth, with gentleness, with reminders that you are allowed to be learning, allowed to be growing, allowed to be unfinished. You stop comparing your journey to anyone else's. You realize that someone else's chapter 20 doesn't invalidate your chapter 3, that their light doesn't dim yours, that you are not behind, you are on your path. And your path, though different, is valid. You stop rushing your process. You start trusting your pace. You begin to see that the detours, the delays, the dead ends, they all taught you something. They were part of the unfolding, not mistakes, but markings. And one day, without realizing it, you find yourself laughing. Not the forced kind, not the polite kind, but the kind that bubbles up from deep inside, the kind that says, I'm alive. And it's in that moment you realize you've turned a corner. You've stepped into a version of yourself you never thought you'd meet. Not because you forced it, but because you surrendered to it. And surrender isn't giving up, it's giving in. It's laying down the weapons you used to fight yourself. It's choosing peace over performance. It's saying, I trust the process, even when I don't understand it. It's learning to float when all you've ever done is swim against the current. And in that floating, you discover something miraculous. Life is carrying you, even when it feels still, even when it feels hard, even when you don't know where it's going. You look around at your life, not perfect, but real, and you feel gratitude. Not because everything is exactly how you imagined, but because you're here, alive, awake, learning, loving. And that's enough. You've stopped striving for a life that looks good. You've started building a life that feels good, that feels aligned, that feels like home. You begin to realize that healing isn't a destination. It's a way of being, a way of choosing, a way of showing up. And it doesn't end, it evolves with each season, with each breath, with each new layer that reveals itself. You don't need to arrive, you just need to stay present, to keep listening, to keep loving, and most importantly, you stop waiting for someone else to save you. You realize you were the one you were waiting for all along. There's something sacred about realizing that you don't need to be rescued, not by a lover, not by a friend, not by success, and not even by time. You wake up one morning and feel it, not as a declaration shouted to the sky, but as a quiet truth anchored in your chest. You've spent so long waiting to be chosen, to be seen, to be fixed. But now you see it clearly. You were never broken. You were only buried, under expectations, under fear, under the need to be who everyone else needed you to be. And slowly, with trembling hands and an opening heart, you begin to unearth yourself. At first, this reclamation feels unfamiliar, like learning a new language. You touch your skin and feel like it belongs to someone else. You speak your truth and your voice shakes because you're not used to hearing it spoken aloud. You choose rest over productivity and guilt creeps in, trying to pull you back into the old rhythm. But you keep going. You begin to remember who you were before the world told you who to be, not as a concept, but as a living presence. You start reconnecting with what made you feel alive before survival dulled your senses. Maybe it was painting. Maybe it was dancing barefoot. Maybe it was staring at the stars without needing to understand them. Whatever it was, you returned to it, not for achievement, but for the joy of it, for the way it softens you, for the way it reminds you that you are more than your roles, your wounds, your responsibilities. You are a soul in motion, a breath in time. You learn to celebrate the quiet wins, the boundaries you held when it was easier to bend, the meal you cooked for yourself even when you felt low, the moment you paused to check in with your breath instead of numbing out. These victories are small to the outside world, but to you they are everything, because they mark your return, they prove your presence, they honor your process. You also stop needing your healing to look inspiring. You let it look like canceling plans, like lying on the floor and crying, like saying, "I'm not okay," without needing to explain why. You no longer measure your progress by how well you hide your pain. You measure it by how gently you meet yourself in it, by how little you judge your messy days, by how often you offer yourself kindness when the old self would have offered criticism. And with that kindness, you start rewriting your inner dialogue. The voice that once told you, "You're not doing enough," becomes, "You're doing your best." The one that said, "You should be over this by now," becomes, "It's okay to feel this." You stop needing to be perfect before you give yourself love. You love yourself in the middle of the mess, in the confusion, in the tears. And that love, imperfect and raw, begins to rebuild what shame once shattered. Your mornings begin to change, not always in routine, but in energy. You no longer wake with dread. You wake with intention, even if that intention is simply to be kind to yourself. You greet the day not with a checklist, but with a breath, with a quiet moment before the world rushes in, with gratitude not because everything is perfect, but because you are present enough to notice what is. The sunlight through the curtains, the warmth of tea between your hands, the chance to begin again. You stop outsourcing your peace. You no longer expect others to regulate your emotions, to soothe your wounds, to validate your existence. You learn to hold space for your own storms, to self-soothe, to speak to yourself like someone you love. And in doing so, you become more whole, not because you never need anyone, but because you're no longer afraid of your own company. This wholeness begins to reflect in your relationships. You no longer tolerate emotional crumbs. You stop begging for love that must be chased. You stop trying to be understood by people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You make peace with being misunderstood, not because it doesn't hurt, but because you'd rather be real and rejected than fake and accepted. You walk away from the performances, from the roles, from the illusions, and you step into the real, into connection that feels safe, reciprocal, and rooted in truth. You learn to enjoy your solitude, not because you've given up on others, but because you've come home to yourself. You walk alone and feel whole. You eat dinner with only your thoughts and find them gentle. You stop fearing empty space. You see it as possibility, as pause, as potential. And in that spaciousness, you rediscover creativity. inspiration, joy, all things that were waiting beneath the clutter. And when sadness returns, as it inevitably does, you no longer resist it. You welcome it like an old friend who comes with stories to tell. You don't ask it to leave before it's ready. You sit with it, you listen, you ask what it needs. And sometimes all it needs is your presence, your willingness to feel, to witness, to breathe. You stop labeling emotions as good or bad. You let them be. You let them pass. And they do. You also learn the art of being with what is, not rushing to change it, not trying to control it, but sitting with it, breathing into it, saying, this is what's here right now, and I can meet it. That presence becomes your superpower. It softens your edges. It deepens your relationships. It creates space for magic. Because when you stop resisting the moment reveals its beauty. And maybe for the first time, you stop living in someday. You stop postponing joy until you lose the weight, get the job, find the partner. You stop saying, I'll be happy when, and instead ask, how can I be present now? You realize that this breath, this moment, this version of you is worthy of celebration, of love, of light. You stop waiting for life to calm down to enjoy it. You find peace in the middle of the chaos. You create pockets of stillness in busy days. You drop into your breath like a prayer. You anchor into presence like a ritual. And you carry that energy with you into conversations, into decisions, into the spaces you once filled with panic. You no longer need everything to be perfect. You just need to be present. And you are. You begin to understand that healing is not about erasing your past. It's about integrating it, about looking at your scars and saying, you brought me here. It's about acknowledging the versions of you that had to survive and thanking them for their strength. It's about embracing the version of you that is learning how to live, how to thrive, how to be soft and strong at once. And as you move through your days, you carry yourself differently. Not because you've become someone new, but because you become more you. You walk with grace, with groundedness, with the kind of confidence that doesn't need to be loud. You don't need to prove your worth anymore. You found it. It was always there, beneath the fear, the noise, the expectations, and now it shines. There is a rare and precious moment that comes when you realize you don't have to carry it all anymore. Not all at once, not all the time. That moment doesn't arrive with thunder or some loud proclamation. It comes quietly, like the breath you didn't know you were holding. It comes as a release in your shoulders, as an exhale that softens your chest, as a knowing deep in your being that says, it's okay to rest now. You've done enough. You've been enough. You are enough. And you don't have to keep proving it anymore. You've spent so much time believing that being strong meant never stopping, that healing meant always pushing forward, that if you just kept going, you'd eventually outrun the parts of you that ached. But you're learning now that healing doesn't ask for hustle. It asks for surrender, for softness, for the willingness to stop doing and just be. Not because you've given up, but because you finally understand that true strength lies in your ability to be gentle with yourself. You start unlearning the myth that says you always have to be okay. That to be valuable, you must be productive. That to be loved, you must always be pleasant. You begin to peel back those layers one by one. The mask of perfection, the smile that hides the exhaustion, the laughter that distracts from the longing. And beneath it all, you find yourself raw, real, imperfect. And you don't flinch. You don't run. You meet yourself there. You say, you're allowed to be exactly as you are. And for the first time, you believe it. This kind of acceptance changes everything. You stop rushing to fix every uncomfortable emotion. You stop apologizing for needing space. You stop justifying your rest. You stop over-explaining your decisions. You realize that you do not owe your peace to anyone's understanding, and that what brings you home to yourself might not make sense to anyone else. But that's okay. It doesn't have to. You learn that choosing yourself will often look like disappointing others, but you no longer see that as something to avoid at all costs. You understand now that you were not put on this earth to manage everyone's perception of you, that your worth isn't tied to how many people approve of your choices, that you do not have to shrink yourself to keep the peace. Sometimes peace means letting go of what's not aligned, even if it once felt safe. And it hurts sometimes. Walking away, drawing lines, standing firm. Especially when you used to find identity in being the one who always said yes. But now you choose differently. You choose truth over comfort. You choose alignment over approval. You choose your well-being over the illusion of keeping everyone happy. And you learn how to breathe through anxiety instead of fighting it, how to sit with sadness instead of escaping it, how to hold your anger with curiosity instead of shame. You stop trying to be a perfectly healed person. You focus instead on being a present one. You start catching yourself in real time, noticing the moment your breath shortens, the way your voice changes when you feel unsafe, the way your thoughts spiral when you feel unseen. But instead of judging those moments, you hold them, you breathe into them. You remind yourself that you are not wrong for feeling, that you are human, that you are healing, that you are allowed to take up space, even in your confusion. There's a wisdom that comes with this kind of awareness. You stop needing to know everything right away. You trust that clarity will come, that your body will guide you, that your heart will open again when it's ready. You no longer force answers. You sit in the questions. You let them simmer. You know now that real transformation happens slowly, often quietly, and almost always in the places you least expect. Your mornings might begin to feel different. You stop waking up in panic. You no longer feel the pressure to get everything right from the start. You give yourself time to land, to feel your body, to stretch, to breathe, to ask, what do I need today? And sometimes the answer is simple. Water, silence, movement, stillness. You begin to honor those answers, even if they don't look productive, even if they don't make sense to anyone else. You trust that your needs are not too much, that listening to them is a form of devotion. You start treating your home differently. It becomes a sanctuary, not just a place to pass through. You light candles because it brings warmth. You tidy the room because it clears your mind. You create small spaces that feel sacred. A cozy chair by the window, a corner with books and blankets. You make space for beauty, not because it's required, but because it feeds your soul. You learn that your environment reflects how you feel, and you start tending to it like you tend to your heart. You stop chasing perfection in your healing. You accept that some days you'll feel like you've regressed, that old patterns might resurface, that triggers will still show up, but you meet those days with grace, with the understanding that healing is not a straight line, that progress doesn't always look like forward motion. Sometimes it looks like choosing rest instead of reaction. Sometimes it looks like forgiving yourself again and again. You begin to create more intentionally, not for applause, but for expression. Not to be seen, but to be felt. Your art, your words, your ideas, they come from a different place now. A place of depth, of presence, of truth. You stop trying to force your voice to sound like anyone else's. You stop measuring your worth in metrics. You write, paint, speak, sing. Not because it will be perfect, but because it is real. And that realness matters. You find yourself giving more generously, but from a different energy. You don't give to prove your goodness. You don't abandon yourself in the name of service. You give because your cup is full, because your heart overflows, because you want to, not because you need to be needed. You learn the difference between self-sacrifice and selfless love. And you choose the kind of love that includes you too. And perhaps most beautifully, you start trusting joy again. You no longer wait for the other shoe to drop. You no longer fear happiness as if it's too good to be true. You savor it. You let it in. You laugh without suspicion. You celebrate without guilt. You understand that joy is not a reward for suffering. It's a right, a medicine, a memory, and you let yourself feel it fully without holding back. You stop needing every moment to be significant. You let the ordinary be holy. The way sunlight dances on your wall, the rhythm of your footsteps on the ground, the sound of your own laughter, the breath in your lungs. These are not just background details. They are the texture of a life being truly lived. And through all of this, you start becoming someone you respect, someone you're proud of, not because you're perfect, but because you are real, because you are present, because you have chosen to come home to yourself over and over again. There's something profoundly life-altering about learning to stay, not in a place